Welcome to the Baseball Biz, everybody. Once again, it's Brandon Noe and myself, Mark Carbett, joining you today, looking at the world of baseball and what's going on now before the season starts. Brandon, how the heck you doing, first off, man?
I'm doing great, Mark. It's another beautiful day here in Tampa Bay.
Tampa Bay is right. My gosh, even though we're all about baseball, there was a little game this past Sunday that caught the eye and attention of a lot of people here in Tampa and around the world.
That's right. The big game, as they call it, but we can't call it what it's really called. But yes, the big game was in town this week.
Yeah, it was crazy for you all who don't know. We are in Tampa, and we do have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Tampa Bay Rays, and even the Rowdies here. But you know what? Now we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what do two Super Bowl quarterbacks have to do with baseball. We're going to talk about the hot stove. Talk about Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Bauer and Tom Brady. What a mix! And also, we'll talk about we'll talk about the MLB. Is there a need there to fix free agency? I mean, what's going on with player compensation and COVID for this upcoming 2021 year? It's going to be an interesting year. Things are still evolving, but we'll share with you what we know. And, of course, February is Black History Month and Major League Baseball. We'll talk a little bit about the history of that and some of the things that are going on there. But first, Brandon, I like this. You thought of it. No pressure. No pressure here in Tampa Bay, is there?
No, not at all. It's a very laid-back atmosphere right now.
Yeah, come on. We won a Super Bowl. We went out and I said the word. We won a Super Bowl, and we went out there and we celebrated. And a lot of people, of course, celebrated without any regard to COVID. That wouldn't be allowed to happen in the NBA or on the field at MLB, but it certainly has happened with the celebrations. But the thing of it is, what comes with that? In Tampa Bay having had two major accomplishments, worldwide accomplishments in this year. I mean, with the hockey, with the Lightning, and now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What are the Rays to think?
I don't know, because they're the only, major sports team, of course, the big four with NHL, NBA, MLB, and NFL. They're the only one of the big four teams that we have that haven't won the world title. Of course, the Lightning won it twice, and now the Bucs have won it twice. The Rays have had a chance to win it twice, but come up short both times, unfortunately. But hey, they're right there, and maybe this year they can add to Tampa Bay.
That could be. I mean, the whole thing of it is we were all so close this past year, and any Rays fan knows. Sitting there watching the sixth game of the World Series, watching Blake Snell on that mound, and that moment came, and Kevin Cash pulled him from the mound, and our hearts fell, and Blake, his heart fell, and we lost him, and now we're looking at 2021. So we do have the distinguished honor of actually being the American League champs for the Rays, but the pressure is on this year to go back in there and show the Dodgers or whoever else happens to be in there our stuff.
Yeah, that's right. The expectations are raised now. Making this just not good enough now. Now you got to win it all. That's the way it should be. I love it.
Expectations are high. Brandon, it is interesting, though, now that we had the big game and that door has closed for the year. We anticipate an opening of the baseball season. It's just a couple weeks out now, man, before everybody starts reporting to spring training. And that's going to be very interesting. And thinking about somebody who's coming to spring training, I keep wondering, will we see Patrick Mahomes sometime going to baseball? I mean, he actually has some baseball history in his family. His father, I believe his father played for about 11 years in Major League Baseball. With the Twins, the Red Sox, Mets, Rangers, Cubs, and the Pirates. Wow, rather traveling there quite a bit. And let's see, he was a pitcher and he had a 5.84 ERA in the American League. And during his 4 years in the National League, he actually averaged, which was later on, a 4.61 ERA. So there's a bit of athleticism. There's a man who had to learn how to handle a ball and to pitch it from the mound. And so I'm sure that his son, Patrick Jr., learned quite a bit from watching his father and grabbing a football and learning how to toss it as well.
Yeah, and you can see some of those throws that he makes. You can tell that he grew up playing baseball because he can throw the deep ball with just like the flick of the wrist. And, we've seen it more and more lately. Guys that have played multiple sports, especially baseball, succeeding in the NFL as quarterbacks. Like Russell Wilson, he played baseball. He even went to spring training with the Yankees for a few years. Mahomes, of course, he grew up around baseball. And Kyler Murray, not only was he the first overall pick in the NFL for the Cardinals, he was also a first round pick by the A's out of high school. And even here, Tom Brady, he was picked in the MLB draft to be a catcher for the Expos.
Man, that would have been something. I mean, so yeah, it does translate. The ability to be, as a good athlete, as a great athlete, to be able to achieve so much. I mean, and I look back too, is like with Bo Jackson, there was somebody, again, who was playing in both leagues, both Major League Baseball and the NFL simultaneously, and doing a heck of a job with it. Not surprisingly, he was able to generate a great ad campaign with Bo Knows, And if you ever want to look up any of that stuff on YouTube about how Bo Jackson did some of the marketing, I think it was with Nike, and they got all the way to where he's doing a commercial with Bo Diddley, and they said, Bo doesn't know Diddley. Yeah, the guitar moves weren't all that great. But anyway, it is amazing looking back there, and like you said, with Russell Wilson and some of the others, and I would have loved to seen Tom Brady as a catcher. I mean, he would have been fierce.
That would have been something else, and I wonder if he did that. How different would the NFL landscape look if you played baseball instead of going to the NFL?
Jesus. A certain New England coach would have had a lot to prove without him, I think.
The sports world would have been completely different.
There's no doubt. So anyway, we enjoyed the big game here in Tampa. Like I said, the pressure is on the Rays. Now, we're looking at without Mahomes moving to the MLB, Brandon. I mean, what's cooking on the hot stove, man? What are you hearing? What's the news?
Well, lots happened, and we haven't had anybody going from the NFL to the MLB, at least not this year. But we had some guys on the move, as we'll start in New York with Jonathan Villar, a utility man signing with the Mets, where he's expected to be a super utility man and playing pretty much all around the field. And the San Francisco Giants signed reliever Jake McGee to a 2-year deal. Big news for Cardinals fans, as Yadier Molina signs a 1-year deal to return to St. Louis. The Angels and Shohei Ohtani agreed to a 2-year, $8.5 million deal. In 2020, he pitched only twice, and he hit 190 with a 657 OPS, so not the greatest of years for Ohtani. Cincinnati and D. Strange Gordon reached a minor league deal. The Mets added center field depth with Albert Almora Jr. on a 1-year deal. He brings strong defense and is a contact hitter with a .309 on-base percentage, where he's expected to be the backup center fielder. We had a big trade in the AL West as two rivals made a trade, with the A's trading Khris Davis, catcher Jonah Heim, and pitching prospect Dane Acker to the Rangers for shortstop Elvis Andrus, catcher Aramis Garcia, and cash considerations. Davis is in the final season of his extension, and Andrus is owed $14 million over the next 2 seasons and a $15 million player option in 2023. Marcel Ozuna, he returns to Atlanta on a 4-year, $64 million deal that includes a 5th-year option that could raise it to $80 million. And we didn't really expect him to return to Atlanta, of course, depending on what the DH ruling would be for this coming year. And last year, he led the NL in home runs with 18 and RBIs with 56 as the DH.
Wow.
St. Louis, they traded Dexter Fowler Jr. and cash considerations to the Angels for a player to be named later. The White Sox signed Jonathan Lucroy to a minor league deal with a camp invite. Baltimore also signed Felix Hernandez to a minor league deal with an invite as well. Alex Colomé and the Twins agreed to a 1-year deal with a 22 option. The contract will pay him $5 million in 21, and the Twins have a $5.5 million option for 22, or can pay a $1.25 million buyout. not bad if you get fired and get $1.25 million.
Yeah, let me know how that worked out. I know a lot of people who would need an attorney, not attorney, but an agent who would be able to help them with something like that.
Heading out to the desert, where the Diamondbacks added Joaquin Soria on a one-year deal. Up in Milwaukee, Colton Wong signs a 2-year deal with the Brewers. He was with the Cardinals previously, but they did not pick up his option for the 21 season, and he has won the Gold Glove twice in the past 2 seasons, but last year he had the career worst OPS at 675, but it was 784 in 2019. And lastly, the biggest news of the week, as Trevor Bauer signs a 3-year, $102 million deal with the Dodgers, where in 21 he's expected to make $40 million. In 2022, he'll raise $45 million, and he has opt-outs after each year. And an interesting thing, Ken Rosenthal said that LA actually thought they were out at one point before he signed with them.
Well, that's really interesting because you're looking at this, and there's been a lot of back and forth. And Trevor Bauer has always been very good about sharing his ideas and where he's at with things online. And even his agent, Rachel Luba, has done a lot of that, which, by the way, you have to salute her, man. Anybody who can do what she did, she's probably making Scott Boras green with envy right now. But that kind of deal that she worked up, I mean, if you look at those first 2 years, that's more than Garrett Cole makes in a year. I mean, if you take the whole thing over 3 years, it's a little less. But just those first, even just taking those first 2 years, it's amazing because he could walk away after that. But can you imagine? Here we are. It's the season of Valentine's. Hearts, flyers, love everywhere. And there they are, the Mets. The news media is out there. And even I think Rachel Luba said, hey, we're down to 2 teams. We're down to the Mets and the Dodgers. And the Mets are standing there at the doorstep, waiting for that date to Mr. Trevor Bauer to appear and take them out on that Valentine date and a whole romance of baseball for years to come. And he doesn't show up.
No, you think you're in love, and then the biggest time you're left hanging like Blake Snell was in Game 6 of the World Series. Nobody shows up, and you're all alone.
Yeah, instead of getting that big bouquet and a giant heart full of delightful chocolate candies, all you get is a little packet of sweet tarts at your door and saying, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm not coming, guys. But as you were saying, the Dodgers at one point thought they weren't even going to be part of this. I mean, a couple of things. I can't imagine. Poor Steve Cohen. I mean, we talk about him time and time again about being an owner who's investing in teams more than just about anybody else out there. And this was the prize pick. Trevor Bauer has been seen as the prize pick of the season. And the excitement has been building up all postseason. And after all his efforts, bang, they didn't get him.
Yeah, and I forgot the night before, it was a big deal on Twitter. Everybody was like, man, it looks like Bauer's going to go to the Mets. And I even commented on it. Of course, I said, if it was true, turns out it wasn't. But that would have been really cool to see him with the Mets because it would have made the NL so much more competitive and spread out. And it also would have moved us a step closer to our dream NLCS with the Padres and Mets.
Yeah, gosh. That would have been huge. I'm still curious to see how that plays out. But, pardon me, I was hearing one announcer the other day saying, or one broadcaster the other day saying, if they knew that it was just the Mets and Dodgers, what if both of them had said, yeah, we're not really happy with these numbers. We're both stepping back. They couldn't do that and collude and do that. But if you had just kind of an understanding saying, $40 million and such, you know what, I'm not going to do it. And if both the Dodgers and the Mets had said that, what would have happened? I can't even begin to imagine.
I don't know. That'd be a heck of a topic for the show.
But Trevor Bauer, he's out there, man. He's performed. He's proven himself, and not surprisingly, a lot of people love him and a lot of expectation. You're going to spend that much money, it's there. I don't know if you can call him the GOAT yet, but the greatest of all time. But as we're talking about closing out the football season with the GOATs, that's kind of looking at some numbers here too, comparing, let's see, Tom Brady with Trevor Bauer. And that's been an interesting career right there alone. You and I were talking about this earlier, looking at, let's see, where was Tom Brady in the draft?
He was the 199th pick.
199th pick. Wow. So in June, I think of 2000, he was New England, and he had a 3-year contract of about $865,000. So he was getting paid $288,333 his first year. Wow. By 2002, he's getting paid $7.4 million. And by 2010, it's $18 million. Then it kind of bounced around a little bit. And let's see, August 2019, $23 million. March 2020, Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay happened, and he had a 2-year contract, $50 million, so $25 million a year. So let me measure this now. $25 million a year for Tom Brady, 2020. And in 2021, we're looking at the Dodgers who are going to be paying Trevor Bauer, at least for that year, over $40 million. I mean, $15 million more than Brady. Is it worth it? I don't know. As a sports fan, is what Tom Brady does, being the pinnacle, being the absolute GOAT of football, does it make sense how players' money is being distributed, what they're being paid? And I know you've done some homework on this, Brandon, trying to look at where the equity is. Share some of your thoughts on that.
This recent signing with Trevor Bauer, signing with Dodgers, it really highlighted to me what is a problem with free agency. And someone I like to listen to believes free agency is broken, and he brought up some really good points, and that made me want to do some more research and bring this up as a topic. And here's my opinion on why I believe that free agency is broken and they need to fix it. So, like we said earlier, he signed a 3-year, $102 million deal with the Dodgers. And he's making $40 million this year, $45 million next year. And both of those years exceed the record annual value of Garrett Cole. And both years are higher than this year's payroll for 3 different teams. The Orioles at 38.9, the Pirates at 37.7, and Indians at 36.5. And his 2022 salary is only $200,000 less than what the Marlins salary is this year at $45.2 million. And I'm not trying to say that players earning how much money is bad. I'm not. But what is bad is that he's making more than what 3 teams are paying out in total. It highlights the major problems with MLB owners' efforts to kill free agency and focus on profits instead of winning. And I'll start by looking at revenue. And
Pardon me. Let me ask you a question here. You're saying the payroll for the Orioles was $38.9 million?
Yes.
I'm looking here at another number. I'm seeing player expenses for the Orioles at $103 million. And what's the difference between those?
The $103 million was from the 2019-2020 season, and the payroll I brought up a few minutes ago is from this coming year.
Ah, okay. That's considerably less. Why would you think there'd be that much difference from $38.9 million to $103 million?
Well, we've seen some teams, they had, high priced players, and then they'll eventually get rid of them through either rebuilds or they just don't want to pay them. Looking at the MLB's revenue, it's consistently going up still, even though, they're saying people are losing interest. Revenue still goes up despite them saying that. And in 2015, they made $8.39 billion in revenue, and the players received 57.3% of that in compensation. And then it kept going up through 2018, where they made $9.9 billion. But the compensation percentage fell to a low since 2012 at 54.2%. Looking at the other leagues, let's take a look at their revenue and player share. The NFL, of course, which is king, leads all 4 pro leagues in revenue with $13 billion, and the players get a 48% share of that. MLB, they make $10 billion, and we haven't seen the player revenue share for this past year, but it has kept going down. I haven't seen the exact percentage yet. The NBA, which is, has become really big the last few years and has a ratings boom, their revenue is at $7.4 billion, with the players' share anywhere between 49 to 51% is where they try to target it. And the NHL has that same target player share, but their revenue is less at $4.43 billion.
Wow.
And we have the total salaries. The NFL leads that at $5.52 billion. And second is not the MLB, it is the NBA, even though it makes about $2.5 billion less than the MLB. They pay more to their players at $3.66 billion, with the MLB in third at $3.45 billion, and the NHL at $2.07 billion.
Here's something I was thinking about as far as revenue. MLB with $10 billion, is that because basically revenues from broadcasting, do you think? Because if you got 162 games a year, you're going to have a lot more TV time and a lot more commercials to sell. And I only thing I can think of is NBA's not going to have that many games. So a distinction of, MLB with $10.5 billion and the NBA with $7.4 billion, or even the NHL with $4.43 billion. Is that a critical piece of that?
Yeah, broadcast rights, that's where they make most of their money, even though ticket revenue is a decent sized chunk. A big piece of their revenue is TV deals. That's why, of course, the NFL makes so much money, is because they're big both on TV and in person. And the MLB, even though they're not big in person anymore, they still have a decent sized audience on TV, which is why they get all the big bucks.
Well, and I see that, I understand. And also from the numbers you're sharing with us, it looks like, MLB has been, if not leading it, it looks like they're leading just about every year. The NBA is getting closer, with an average looks around 50%, NHL with 50%, and NFL down around 48%. But so what are we looking at? What are you thinking as far as how that should impact what players should be getting? What impacts things with the salary floor cap? What do you see there?
Yeah, and looking at all the stuff I just mentioned, you might think, hey, what's wrong? The MLB players get a pretty good share of what they're making.
Yeah.
But the problem is the other three leagues, it's collectively bargained how much money owners have to spend. Such as the NFL, their salary floor was $169.4 million, with the cap at $188.2 million for the 1920 season. And the NBA had a floor of $98.2 with a cap of $109.1, with the luxury tax coming in at $132.6 million, because they don't have hard caps. You can spend below the floor, but you can also spend above the cap. So that's where the luxury tax comes in. It's sort of like to discourage you from just spending so much money to get all the stars. So they put in a luxury tax for that. And the NHL has a floor of $60.2 million with the cap of $81.5 million.
I'm dumbfounded. I was a little surprised by some of this, but it is interesting to see. And I know you've done a lot of homework on this. I saw some of it you got from sportscasting.com and statista.com, and also reaching, Cheryl, you're talking about earlier, Cheryl Ring. But it is interesting. A lot of good sources there to dig out this information and talking about floors and caps. And what do you think is going on from here? What are we seeing as far as teams right now? If I was going to compare major league teams, say like the Yankees and some of the other ones, what would I see as far as the revenue they're taking in and what their player expenses are? Would I see still like a 50% level, do you think, or how does it look?
Looking at Forbes, even though we're not going to get the exact, financial situation that MLB teams really have, because they don't open up their books, but they do make considerably good amount of money. The Yankees, of course, they were first in revenue with $683 million in revenue, and they spend $220 million on players. They have an operating income, which is basically a fancy word for profit, of $35 million. And in last place, you have the Marlins with a revenue of $222 million, with player expenses at $98 million and they actually lost money. They lost $5.9 million.
Wow. I'm still not sure where that goes. Is some of that stadium money, if it's paying off some things there or not? Because I know that when the owner who had them previously sold it, he had to pay the city back for the park.
Yeah, they got to spend a ton of money on stadium upgrades. Some of them even around the stadium, they own some of that land as well, like the Braves, so they may spend some money on that as well. And just normal employees, a good chunk of that goes towards them.
Well, there's a lot of talk about all this going on. I had the good fortune of speaking with a sports writer, actually writer overall, and that's Maury Brown the other day. He's written for Forbes and a lot of other ones. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in that conversation later. But he shared a lot, was looking at Twitter as far as what's going on with the potentially a salary floor and some caps and MLB and MLBPA discussions. But before we get into that, I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you and what you found also with I guess it was Cheryl Ring, some of the observations about this.
Yeah, and this is a problem as you look at it, but nobody's come up with any ideas to really fix it. So I'm one of those believers that they don't need to add a cap because the luxury tax sort of acts like a soft cap anyways, because we've seen teams trade away guys to get under the tax. Like we saw it recently with the Red Sox trading away Mookie Betts to get under the luxury tax. And what I believe they should add is a salary floor, much like the NBA, to where even if you are below the floor, like when the 76ers were, when they were going through the process, they were basically tanking for years. Like they were really bad, not even winning 10 games. They still had to distribute the difference to all the players. So looking at the NBA salary or the floor from a couple years ago, it was at $98.2 million. So say if you only spend $88.2 million of that, and you still have a $10 million difference, you still have to pay that $10 million out and disperse it evenly among your players. So you can think that you're, being cheaper and getting around it, but you still eventually do have to pay all that money.
Well, that brings up another question as far as I'm concerned. I'm looking at that and saying, okay, if you still have to pay all that money, is the talent that you have that you're putting on the field, are they worth it? If you make me put down a salary floor, then I need to be able to have players I can buy for that. And maybe you hit me 1 year where it hurts, then am I going to be able to take that additional $20 million the next year and say, okay, next year I'll invest it. Next year I'll get some great players. But I'm sorry, they're not there. This tickles me too, because I'm thinking about people who say the MLB should have some expansion. If we have teams that are experiencing this difficulty now, getting the players, I'm not talking about money in the stands. I'm talking about the ability to get quality players. If they're not there, it's like, even if I had the money, they're not there. I'm being punished for that. You tell me.
And that's a good point. I really do see where you're coming from, but I believe it'll do a good job because we talked about it before. We even talked about this morning. The MLB is very top heavy because we look at teams like the Yankees and Dodgers. They can easily spend over $200 million, while some teams either choose not to or just can't spend even over $100 million. Right. I think it would really do a good job of, look, for example, the Rays, the team we have now. They traded away Snell and let Morton walk because they couldn't afford them. And if they had to spend a certain amount of money, a set amount, I believe it would do a good job of keeping guys in their original place. Like we could be able to keep Snell, keep Morton, eventually keep Adames when it comes time for them to get paid. We can keep teams together for a longer period. In that way, it spreads out more competition and the league doesn't become so top heavy.
Well, and this goes back to, you don't have to pay me much. If I'm a Blake Snell, the first year I'm with you in the majors, you were paying me around $500,000. You were paying me the same as anybody else who made it to the show. And that goes on for 3 years before they get into pre-arbitration. So maybe there is talent that's out there, but some teams saying, okay, I have this talent and I've I've got maybe a $20 million, $30 million talent with Snell, but I've got guys in the farm system. I've got players to be named later that I can bring in. And maybe that's the way the philosophy is. I think a lot of times, Brandon, MLB needs to look at, and the Players Association needs to look at shortening that amount of time before they hit free agency, or at least hit arbitration. So for those first 3 years, they're stuck. And that would mean that MLB would be paying players more. But I don't know. Well, here's another quick thought just for fun. If they had to pay players more, would you see different people coming into baseball? Would you see Mahomes? Would you see Brady? Would you see other talent that's gone to other sports come into baseball? I think people play baseball for the love of it, but I think there's also people out there saying, okay, I have this great talent. I can flip a coin because I love them both so much. Where would I go?
Yeah, and they might even say, like Kyler Murray was given advice by, I believe it was A-Rod, that, hey, go the baseball route. You can eventually make more money, and it's not as physical, so you won't end up hurting yourself as much.
Yeah, less likely to get concussed unless you're on the receiving end of a Robbins Chapman or somebody else up there.
Yeah.
But my favorite player. But I spoke, like I said, with Maury Brown the other day. I actually was texting back and forth through, and one of the things I was asking, I said, what's going to happen here, man? I mean, do you see this? And he says, well, there's a lot of talk going on, Mark. He says, the MLBPA is going to try to get the players' salary arbitration sooner. And some of the offsets he was saying is MLB is leaning into players with low service time under club control, and they really don't want that, obviously. He told me he's expecting that the Players Association will claw back to where they would like to be, and that's not going to probably happen in one labor deal. And for those you don't know, the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, is coming up in a year, so wonder if we're going to ball in 2022. But he's saying, well, the Players Association is probably the mindset that they're going to treat like the old adage of eating the elephant. How do you eat an elephant? One spoonful at a time. They're not going to get everything they want immediately in that next CBA. So we'll see. I don't know.
In my research, I found Cheryl Ring of BeyondTheBoxScore.com. She wrote an article about putting in a salary floor, and here's some of the things that she wrote. And she says, I propose a $120 million salary floor in MLB. That's not as high as it sounds. That's only 58% of the luxury tax in 2019, which at the time was $206 million, which makes the minimum payroll 58%, which is below the NBA's, which is at 90%. And in 2019, the average payroll was $137 million, and 19 teams of the 30 exceeded $120 million payrolls in 2019, with 3 more within $10 million of that mark. So 2/3 of the league already pays that much payroll. And here's a line I really agree with. If you're an owner who can't afford to pay 58% of the luxury tax number, you probably shouldn't be an owner at all.
That's a very good point, and one I hate to admit here in Tampa, but it's a very good point.
Yeah, and even the great Dick Vitale said it on a local station here. He was talking about our boy Stewie. He said, if you don't own the cash to play with the big boys, don't own the team. Now, that's my bad Dick Vitale impression, but that's what he said.
Well, that is it, man. If you don't have the money to play, don't get in here. If you went in to play poker somewhere and you don't have enough to put down to even ante up, you don't need to be in there.
Yeah. And you might be asking, if most of the teams are paying over that anyways, who is this target? And she says the tanking teams. And in 2019, with payrolls under $110 million, teams were the Padres, Royals, A's, White Sox, Marlins, Orioles, Pirates, and Rays. And all but the A's and Rays, who made the playoffs that year, finished with losing records. And plus, with all these teams tanking, it really becomes a problem, because in 2019, there were 400 lost teams and 990 lost teams. And I don't know about you, but I don't really want to watch teams or even a league with all these teams that they suck, where it's a third of the league is trying to lose on purpose. I mean, I get it. I'm for tanking, but I don't want this big of
You're
an
for
amount.
tanking?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have like a chance, it doesn't make sense to go out there and spend all that money. It takes time, rebuild through the farm system, eventually build it back up, and then spend the money on free agents. That's my belief. We can go into that at a different time. And
Okay.
people have wrote so many things. Sports Illustrated said they should threaten them with relegations, and a whole bunch of other things. And that she also writes, requiring every team to spend at least $120 million on payroll would disincentivize teams from taking and keep even second-tier teams more competitive. That way, that they might be a little iffy on spending all that money. They might think, well, I got to spend the money anyway. I can't afford, the top-tier prime free agents like a Trevor Bauer. But I may be able to get, maybe a second-tier free agent like a Dallas Keuchel a couple years ago. So more teams may be in play for the second-tier free agents, and also those free agents won't be left out in the dark. And like I said, just because you tank doesn't mean you'll get the first draft pick, because they had the 4 teams that lost 100 games in 19. The Blue Jays, yes, the Blue Jays were bad in 2019. They went 67 and 95, and they were 13 games out of last. And the Royals, they were 59 and 103. You might think, my God, that's a horrible record. There's no way anybody was worse than them. Well, you're dead wrong, because the Tigers were 11 games worse than them. So many teams are tanking that it really doesn't matter. It's almost a wash. And plus, I'll give you maybe a little bit of a dirty secret. The more competitive teams equals more eyeballs on your sport, which leads to more money in the pockets of owners and players.
Wow. I don't think I realized the ugliness that had come to the records of some of these teams and how bad they had suffered. I mean, I don't expect, obviously, everybody to hit 500, but when you're talking about the Royals being 59 and 103 and the Tigers are behind that, it's like, oh my gosh. It's tough to be a fan, man. It really is for those teams. And it does turn into revenue. I mean, people who, let's face it, there's a lot of fans who are, lackluster, who will follow a team when it's strong. They buy all the gear, they watch all the games, they go to the games, but a lot of fair weather fans, so to speak. And it's going to take some money to make some money.
Yeah, and Dickie V said, if you don't own the cash to play with the big team, with the big boys, don't own the team.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit unfair when we look at expanded playoffs, because I'm looking at some of these guys, and there may actually be a team or two in there that is beneath a 500 win-loss record. And it seems unfair to teams that have spent the money, have developed the talent, and are making a difference out there. I don't know. I mean, what's your opinion when you're looking at this, and what do you see as some of the rectification? I mean, obviously, I guess the salary floor would be part of that.
I mean, the expanded playoffs, I think it would have some good, because you would have some teams like the Royals were a few years ago when they were really good winning the World Series, where they spent the money to try and keep that team together, and eventually got to the point where they couldn't afford all those guys, and they had to, blow that team up pretty much. So you'll have those teams at times, but you'll also have the teams where it's like, well, hey, if all these spots are for grabs, I can just barely sneak in. I get a good slice of that playoff revenue. So if I don't have to spend all the money and I can still make the playoffs to get all that money, I'm in. So it's a bit of a good and bad with that.
Curious to see how things develop continually with the Players Association and with the league, with the Major League Baseball. Again, I was reaching out to Maury Brown, and some of the things he was saying is, I was asking, I said, do you think they're going to be able to set a salary floor? Since this great disparity in payment to some of the talented players, and trying to find some equity from the top, paid teams to the least. He says, what do you think there's going to be some changes there? He says, well, it's doubtful. He says, historically, a floor has been seen tied to a cap, and there's already a de facto floor, the minimum salary and cap. So the system they need, or would even consider, needs to be a hybrid. Other sports see percentage of related revenues that have to go into salaries. He says this isn't perfect, potential for overcompensation, which we talked about, but it would force clubs to spend. There needs to be increased revenue sharing, but penalties for clubs that live off of it. Yeah, and I mean, I think you and I both agree with that that clubs that aren't spending, clubs that are tanking, they need to step up. And like you said, your buddy Dick Vitale said, man, if you don't have the money, don't come. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly it, but it is important. And I don't know what we're going to see at the end of the year with Major League Baseball and the Players Association, but it is interesting that I thought, are they going to come to any kind of agreement? Looking at the upcoming season, while the CBA expires this year and they have to have something in place for 2022, they have been coming up, meaning Major League Baseball and the Players Association, with some agreements. And I think this just came out the other day. They have decided for this year that they are going to continue with the doubleheaders as seven-inning doubleheaders. And also, what was the other one, Brandon? The rule with having a player in the 10th inning?
Yeah, the runner starting on second and extra innings.
An extra inning. So that one's there. I think they're finally figuring out the last bits as far as COVID and how they're going to try to keep everybody safe. Last year they had a good plan, but it's a bit of a disaster with the Cardinals and Marlins early on, but they seem to have worked that out. But it seems like Major League Baseball is holding out the designated hitter as a sticking point. And I don't know what reason they would even have that as a point of contention with the Players Association. I mean, the Players Association seems to want it, and I would think that the owners would want it. So what's the deal?
I don't know exactly what's going on, but as an outsider looking in, I feel that it's like the Players Association really wants the universal DH, and the owners really want the 16-team playoffs, but the PA doesn't want that. So it's kind of like, hey, if you don't get the 16 play, or if we don't get the 16 playoffs, then you don't get the universal DH. It's kind of like it's like that old commercial we saw a few years ago with the insurance guy, where the old man with his fishing pole was holding $1 at the end of it. He was like, "Oh, you got to be quicker than that. You got to be quicker. You can get it." It's kind of like
that. Oh gosh, I hate that, but it's too true. It's a good way of pointing it out. Yeah. Oh geez, Brandon. I don't know, brother. We can just sit and wait. Spring training's getting ready to start here, and it's going to be interesting. We've had a lot to talk about, here in preseason, and who would have guessed? The hot stove. I said, I'm not surprised it took to this point before Trevor Bauer came into an agreement with the team. It's been exciting. Well, let's take a look at the front office. What's going on in Major League Baseball front office? We're stepping away from talking about the players and the hot stove and talking about the Players Association and salary floors and caps. One of the things talking about in the front office is reflecting on what's happening in baseball and also with Black History Month. I found it interesting as we were preparing for shows earlier last month, and I was looking at birthdays and seeing that Jackie Robinson and Mr. Sunshine, Ernie Banks, shared a birthday on January 31st. Black History Month, you get the shortest month of the year, February with 28 days. I think that we need to go ahead and move it back and start Black History Month at least on January 31st, because those two guys would be a great way to start, promoting the entire month. And you look at baseball. I mean, let's face it, it's one of the most old white male organizations that are out there. I mean, it's what baseball is, not surprisingly. So, say what's happening as far as some inroads that are making. What's happening different? And one of the things is you're starting to see a crack in the door. On the field you see Dusty Baker. And there's other folks, minorities, that are out there as well. I'm just saying him because of ageism too, I guess. But you look at what recently the Major League Baseball brought in Ken Griffey Jr. And while he's African-American, the other part that I really like about that is they're bringing somebody who's been on the field into the office. So I celebrate that they're bringing somebody, an African-American, into the office, but they're also bringing a player into the office. And I think he's going to bring a positive energy experience into that office that just wasn't there amongst all those old white guys. So it's been needed, man. It's something, and I'm looking forward to see what vitality he can do, and hopefully make some changes long term. It's like a lot of other things where Maury Brown was saying, it's like the Players Association is going to be clawing back slowly. Unfortunately, I think that's the same case here. We look, locally, a bit of sunshine here too. One of my favorite players was outfielder Denard Span, and Pham I think came in later and took that spot. Denard, I don't know if he was even here with us for a year, but I loved him. He was an older player. He exhibited leadership qualities that I think the younger players listened to him, and I think every team needs somebody like that. And at the time that he was being traded away from here, he told the folks in the front office, I'd like to come back. He was speaking as a player. He'd like to come back. His hometown's here in Tampa. And so he wanted to come back as a player, but once a couple of years later, he retires and say, hey, Denard, would you like to come be part of the Rays front office? So, whoa, that's the sort of thing we need to see happening. So in Black History Month, I'd like to see more activities like this, as far as actions taken to support and elevate, African-American players into the system. And I'm not talking about on the field. I'd like to see that too. But I'd certainly like to see more of it into the front offices.
Yeah, we're seeing with all these leagues, really all of them except the NBA, is really struggling with diversity inside the organizations, front offices and ownerships. And, slowly some teams we're seeing start to be more diverse, and some teams aren't, just to be frank. But slowly but surely we're getting there. Not as quick as it should be, or quite frankly, we should already be there. But one day, hopefully, it'll be as diverse as it should be.
Well, I think there's a lot of, like I said, looking at somebody like Denard Span, he can mentor a lot of folks too. I mean, in the office and probably even out there on the field to some degree. I'm not sure what all capacity he'll be serving, but he's definitely going to be a big part of it. Looking a little further too at Black History Month, it's worth noting Hank Aaron's birthday is in February. It was February 5th, and not Black History Month, but the guy whose record he beat, Babe Ruth, is on February 6th. And more importantly, I guess, the Negro National League was formed on February 11th, or 13th, as some people would say, February 11th, 1920. So the Negro National League, and that was formed in Kansas City at a YMCA. And so there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things to celebrate this month in February. And in Black history, there's a lot of good things that we should look back on that have happened and look forward to a lot of things that still need to happen. Well, Brandon, you got anything else to bring to the table?
No, just thank you for listening. And only one more week.
One more week. Okay. Well, no, we'll take some of the pressure off of the Rays. Hopefully as things go ahead and move along this year. But as always, you can find me at TheBaseballBiz, and you can find Brandon at Sports Blitz Pod on Twitter. And there's a lot going on there. Brandon, I think you're probably going to post some things too with maybe a little bit more information on the pieces we talked about as far as the team's revenues and players. So, yeah, if you could share that later. Check him out, again, at Sports Blitz Pod on Twitter. Then also, folks, you can find us on several podcast directories, including iHeartRadio, Podbean, Apple, iTunes. What else, Brandon? Where else are we?
We're on a Buzzsprout, or iHeart, of course, Apple. Pretty much everywhere you find your podcasts, we're there.
Well, there you go. Everywhere you can find the podcast. So, again, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple. I also want to give thanks again to, Cheryl Ring, who provided some of the information I know from a past article that you talked about. Maury Brown, Statista.com, MLB Rumors. God knows, there's a lot of good information out there, so we want to thank those folks. Also, I want to thank X-Take RUX for the music they provide, Rocking Forward. Thanks again, and we look forward to talking with you all again real soon.